Thank you. It's the first time I've felt tall in my entire life. There you go. Right. Thank you very much for having me this morning. I'm going to use what time left that Ewan has left me. So thanks very much. Sorry, Ewan told me off recently for not being more serious as an academic. It's not going well. Although, can I just point out that he was more comedic in his presentation than I am in my stand-up. So now we've got the funny stuff out of the way, let's do something serious. Hello, yes, I'm Dr. Simon Howard Walker. I'm a research lead in the Healthy Working Lives group under Ewan McDonald, which is why I get to make jokes that he'll fire me for later. And I'm a specialist in occupational health research, particularly suicidality and mental health issues. It's an odd choice to get me to come and talk to you about the Robens report, but the reason for that is, before all that, is to be a historian. I suppose I am a historian. So I'm getting to do history, which is exciting, because I never really get to do that now, except I'm probably talking to a room who know more about it than I do. So correct me if you like, I'd like to make this interactive. So who is Lord Robens of Wallingham? Good question. British politician, trade unionist, industrialist, best known as, hopefully, why we're here, for his role in shaping the workplace safety legislation. Yeah, he was Labour MP from 45 to 60, Minister of Labour 51, and became the chair of the National Coal Board during the period of major industrial decline. This is someone who was very much in the know. Now, this is where you get to the first issue, which is Aberfan. And I would be surprised if anybody in the room doesn't know about the Aberfan disaster. But if you don't, in Wales there was a slip, and parts of the village of Aberfan were destroyed, including the school. In 1966, 144 people died, and 116 of them were children aged 7 to 10. Now, it was a horrific event. It was an event that Robens later said on record should never have happened, that it was preventable. In 1970, he chaired a committee which led to the report which came out in 72. That report led to the Health and Safety at Work Act in 74, which I'll go on to talk about. The big point here is that, in many ways, well, in every way, Aberfan should never have happened. Robens highlighted the fact that it was preventable, that the information was available, but this was very much, as I've called it, Wild West working, in terms of if nobody said anything, there is no problem. Now, in the modern workforce, we obviously don't have that problem anymore. Except we obviously do. Just checking for anyone who misses my northern sarcasm. It's very difficult for someone from the north to talk about coal mining and not swear. Do my best. So let's talk a little bit about what it was like before the 1970s, before, yes, Aberfan, but what we're actually talking about here is decades and decades of issues in work, of deaths and fatalities and injuries and the works of it. So there's a very famous person who essentially wrote the Health and Safety at Work Act, and he went on record as talking about why he got involved in it. And he said that his reason, having been a tool maker in Manchester, in Oldenshaw, he said that his reason for being involved was that while he was in the factory, his mate got his hand caught in the machinery, and they started screaming, there were no guards on the machines, and he lost his hand. This was in the 1948. No, 1948, sorry. And the story that's quoted said that it's quite a what do I say? He said it was the cogs ran red with blood. It's quite an emotive sentence. He was a politician, you'll have to forgive it. But that then led him to be part of the team that wrote the Health and Safety at Work Act. And it was, as we know, it crossed several different policies, it crossed all the different parties. It was so important But it started in the 1950s and we didn't get it to 1974. Robens is part of the equation, but he's not the be-all and end-all of the equation, which I think is important because some of the history books tend to say otherwise. But prior to this, workplaces incredibly dangerous, and the responsibility was questionable. Who has responsibility? Are you responsible because you're the worker, or is the person who is doing the work responsible? Keep yourself safe. And you've also got post-Victorian values of, well, you can replace people quite easily. After the 1960s, because the press picks it up, unfortunately how we usually get momentum on anything is the press suddenly notice, it sells headlines, it gets people's attention. After that, the government then lead to an inquiry in the National Court Board, and he spends 2 years investigating workplace safety across Britain. Robens finally makes the point that if the regulations aren't working, the Factory Acts as they exist are barely covering the modern technologies. Most of the Factory Acts were designed in the late Victorian period. They were changed again during the First World War because of DORA, and a way to keep workers working so we can fight. And the same for the Second World War. They weren't focused on protecting, they were focused on having a healthy workforce so you can keep a war effort. And that's a carryover from the First and Second World War. So what did Robens' report ultimately find? Keep clicking my slides, it does not. Essentially, Robens suggested that the best thing we could do was shift the responsibility. Instead of relying on the government to focus on enforcement, bear in mind that you're only 20, 25, 30 years away from this new socialised approach to healthcare, public healthcare. Up until 1947, the NHS didn't exist. Socialised healthcare was not looked at very favourably. You're less than 100 years away from 1911, the National Insurance Act. The British government, even though they had a Labour government in 45, is still leaning on this laissez-faire, everyone can look after themselves. There is a massive swing, but arguably, well, definitely, it doesn't go far enough. So instead, Robens argued that the general duty of care meant that employers had a legal duty to ensure their workers' health, safety and welfare. Workers also have a responsibility to follow safety procedures and look after themselves and colleagues. It was a major shift. It wasn't just about punishing companies when they did wrong, it was about preventing accidents in the first place. And this leads to change. It leads to significant changes in the development of the HSE, and obviously the health and safety worker then created the HSE by forcing employers to take on responsibility. But it's very easy to be critical of the guidelines. Now, bear in mind we're looking back at it 50 years later. Work has changed, technology has changed, workplaces have changed. However, nobody likes the Robens report in some ways. Sorry, my tablet just decided to die. And the reason for that is that it either didn't go far enough or it went too far. So pick your favourite. 2 seconds again. So what does it do? It reduces workplace fatalities and injuries. It creates a flexible framework that adapts to technology, and it shifts us forward in punishment. But has almost no focus on occupational health. No. When I wrote that, I wanted to write has no focus on occupational health, but that's not entirely true. There are a couple of lines that look at occupational health, so we have to give credit where credit's due. But there is no focus on mental health at all. Big criticisms are on whether or not, whose responsibility is it, and there's still this pushing towards, workers are responsible for their own issues. So the reason I've rushed through that slightly is because the history of Robens is available for you online. I think what's more interesting here is the discussion about where we stand now. Like what did the Act do one of the questions that somebody asked me recently was, if Robens was to do his report today, would it look the same? And I think that's a really interesting question because it raises additional questions for you. For example, is the workplace the same now? No. Now we've got gig economies. We've got cups that break. We've got... Thank you, it's the first good laugh I've had all day. We've got people who work multiple jobs. I'm a semi-successful academic, apparently, but I work 3 jobs at the same time. My working hours are usually around 60 to 70 hours a week. And I'm definitely not alone. So what impact is that having, and how are those workers protected? Those, Deliveroo people zipping around on electric bikes, what care and health, what support do they have? And the answer to that at the moment is very little. So the question is whether or not that report is fit for purpose, and what is it missing? The work from home thing. I'm a massive fan of working from home. If I can get away without wearing trousers and working, that's a good deal. But I am required to be in the office very often, and I don't like it. I can't park, it costs me money, and I feel I'm half as productive. But then where is the care? Who's looking after me, my health and safety, my MSK issues, my depression issues, etc.? So, what I'm going to finish off with is going back to the chap who wrote the Health and Safety at Work Act was Harold Walker. Harold Walker was my grandfather, which is probably the real reason why they asked me to speak. It's got nothing to do with my experience and my qualifications. I might be a doctor, who cares? Grandfather, yeah. Harold died when I was 19. So my memories of him are fragmented, and most of them when I was very small. But I remember hearing stories about Barbara Castle, who he worked under and occasionally hated. I remember stories about Arthur Scargill, no comment, and so on and so forth. I met Thatcher. Weirdly thin hands. And I met Robens. I remember him because when I saw his picture I thought I'd met that dude. And the last thing that Harold did when he was in the Lords was he talked about the Health and Safety Act in relation to asbestos. His last ever public on the record speech, and he said it didn't go far enough, it didn't do enough, and it needed to be improved. So the last thing he said in the Lords, because it wasn't protecting workers, it wasn't fit for purpose. And I think that's what we need to take into account now as we move into a world of AI and working from home and new jobs and new tech and working longer. We need to reevaluate those rules, those legislations, and maybe we have to go back to basics with the Robens report. Thank you very much.